allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You want to sit right here?
So, I was thinking that we were like we were easel-based, so I used it out.
Yeah, of course.
You want to check
Yeah, it's my first time. I'll come down here.
I did, you guys would fall asleep.
Where do you want it, John?
Oh, maybe
Right here?
The old drummer.
Right about where I was going to sit? Nice. Give me a hard time.
So the,
How are you? I knew you were there.
since we're not that far,
You're running to school for it.
that we could give you a draft at this point, I just was sort of giving an up-to-date, like, and I realized you never really had a scoping session, like if it was something like an EIS, you'd be looking at like a scoping package, so. Table of contents, so at least show you
That's
sort
its
of
own
format
kind of challenge.
of what the.
You want to cue this up, Brian, and for the public, what we're doing?
It's an update from the Historic District Committee who have been working on kind of the meat of the Historic District guidelines. Is that enough of it?
That's good.
All right. And who's been working on the potatoes?
Potatoes? I would say,
Nobody starves these days.
That's true. With everyone, you know.
so,
paleo.
yeah, but it's important, I guess, that Steve Tilley is the group that we approved a contract with him to provide input into the committee, so that the committee could digest it and then eventually come to us
So,
with that.
so Steve Tilley, and what we're showing you today is the agreed upon kind of scope for the guidelines, and then also a format, beginning format that they put together. And that the committee is at a point now where they've approved the format and are waiting for a completed draft. Before we distributed the drafts to your board, we just wanted to make sure that the committee had time to see this completed product. So if we just go through the table of contents, the first section is like.
No, it's okay.
Should is yes.
It's okay.
There's one hanging right there.
Oh, look at that. Okay. Hello.
You're fine.
Yeah,
You speak up, that's all.
I know. And don't curse, like I usually do. Not to curse.
Can't help that.
Yeah. So there's a first section which is just sort of an explanation of how to read the guidelines. It sort of gives a description of the format. There's some stuff that we show on that page. Then an introduction which outlines the benefits of the guidelines, and then gives a little historic synopsis of the district that's related. Then there's a summary which we don't have examples to show you, but it's going to show the examples of all the historic styles in the various areas. So the guidelines in general are broken down into residential, which would be the side streets of the district, the main street corridor, and then the waterfront. All of these districts have enough different about them that they have the section of the guidelines address them separately.
And what about the outliers? Like, I don't know, the churches, what else are the outliers?
Yeah, I mean, some of those things that are in the district, the churches are not really addressed in their own district. The churches are enough of an outlier and enough of strong buildings that there's probably not going to be much that's going to be directed at them. Yeah.
What about some of the other, I forget it, Trent Building included?
The Trent Building is not considered part of the waterfront, so that would be addressed in that section.
Okay.
So then,
It's not an
It's
industrial.
not officially in the waterfront.
Yes, no, it's not, it's in the business zone.
right.
Okay.
So then the guidelines after it's sort of a description of, oh, these are all the things we have, and this is what's valuable about the things that we have. Then it goes into the first section that's part 3, is if you're going to modify and repair those guidelines, or repair those buildings, what would be the right and potentially the wrong thing to do. The committee had a long discussion about how the tenor of the guidelines and what language we were going to use, and agreed upon recommended and not recommended. So the guidelines are not intended to move beyond a recommendation. They're intended to say, look, this is what's valuable about your property, this is what we recommend you do to protect the value of the neighboring property, and then it's up to the ARB, but it's not a hard and fast, and it's intended to be written that way, a little bit soft, so that because there will be conditions where the recommendations that are said here won't apply or won't be appropriate, and that's what the ARB will be able to determine.
Will you have any discussion of when they may not be applicable? And I'll tell
We'll
you,
see.
I'll tell you what I'm getting at is because if, I would imagine if this document could be, not accepted, what's the word, used by the ARB intact as actual guidelines for decision-making. And, if it did have something that had some exception cases, examples of where the kind of, because the problem is, again, we've got to have support for the decision process.
Right.
And we can't have it come off being, by we, I mean the village collectively, can't have it come off being arbitrary. So if there are some conditions where it says, we could give some thought to it at least.
Right. Okay. Deb being on the ARB has been part of the discussion, and there's been a lot of sort of tuning up about, how making sure that the guidelines are prescriptive enough to give the ARB support, but not so prescriptive that they shut down variety and shut down creativity and things like that. So that's the balancing act that we've been trying to focus on. So and we'll keep that in mind. I mean, I should say that we would. And then so within this modification and renovation portion, there are recommendations that go to each of the districts, each of the building types, the residential, the Main Street, and the waterfront. And then there's in the next section, it refers to new construction. Say you're building a new building in the district, or your building is not contributing to start, and then we'll have a separate set of recommendations. So I just wanted to show you just the format in general. So this is the first pass. It's sort of the how-to page. It goes through. There's a little icon in the guidelines that indicate whether you're in the residential or the commercial or the waterfront zone, which one you're referring to. The benefits and history part would outline the map and sort of go through the benefits and sort of history of what made the district special. There'd be some images showing that. So this is a portion of their residential guidelines. So this is a section that would be on porches and porticos. So it'll give some examples from the district of different types of porches and porticos. And then it will give recommended treatments and not recommended, things that we'd rather not do. So there's a discussion of things like enclosing front porches and the impact that has. A discussion about the kind of detail that you would want to protect if you can and reuse.
Those close-ups are great.
Right. So and here's your little color-coded format that they've developed, so you know which section you're in. It's supposed to make it a little bit easier. So here's a section on windows. A lot of this is meant to also inform a lot of the reasons stuff ends up in the dumpster that maybe shouldn't have or could have added value to, is that people don't understand what's important about it. So this sort of tries to tell you just sort of, the language of what window is and what parts of it are valuable and why you might keep it.
It could have the effect of people not throwing something out and
Right.
trying to reuse it rather than just say, I want to just take it out and throw it away.
Right, or at least when they do a replacement, they'll understand that the mullion pattern of their windows is what gave the house the character. And if you put back a new window, it's not going to cost, the new window's going to cost $1,000 whether you do the right mullion pattern or not. The hope is here when they put in the new windows because they want, better thermal performance, they'll do it in a way that they understand what they're doing. And at least understand, like if they're trying to save a little money here, they'll understand what impact that has. There's also discussion of shutters and that. And then it would turn to the Main Street section and do a similar kind of thing. The first section would be to describe what's important about the different bodies and give you sort of the language of how you talk about a commercial building in there, the cornice, the body, the sign bar. And then sort of talk about the different components and what's important and what you would recommend do and not do. There is, I don't know if you guys noticed this storefront that's up at the top of the hill that has like a little salon in it.
Yeah.
So this is a prismatic glass that a lot of buildings around here used to have, which was before electric light. It actually focused the sunlight and sent it to the back of the building. It was like some kind of early technical thing to try to light a building. It's kind of cool. There's one that is,
Off the grid.
you always find these things painted over, like, oh, and they kind of look like,
bright light.
yeah.
They're the first things to go when people replace storefront windows.
It was old fashioned to get new stuff. Right?
Yeah, lights now, I don't need that stuff. So this is what the section on cornices would be. So you see, like the recommendations say, are in here, it's the case of regularly inspect the cornice. If you're repairing it, look at adjacent cornices to see if you don't have evidence. And then it also says, fiberglass and other durable substitutes are acceptable. Meaning, like, the problem with these is they're so high up and hard to maintain. Again, this isn't a preservation project. It's a, historic project, but not preservation. You could replace it with fiberglass, then you could not have to worry about it for 100 years. So it tries to point to those kind of opportunities. There is a section on signs, which the first line of is you have to meet the sign code, and then sort of talks about historically where a sign would be in the right place. And then a similar thing would happen for the waterfront. The waterfront guidelines, that the buildings in the waterfront are different enough that generally the recommendations are going to be different. There aren't a lot of the detail and stuff that are elsewhere that are not really there. So that's kind of where we are. And then the last section would have, part 5 would be sort of a functional section. So it's like, well, how, I'm doing something in my house, what do I do next? What boards do I have to go to in which case? There'll be an explanation of that. And there would also be an appendix, which isn't in the table of contents right now, but would give you resources. So outside resources about, all things historic preservation of houses. So that's where we were. So we just wanted to review and make sure you guys thought we were on the right page and sort of collect any comments or concerns based on that summary.
To me, it looks like Steve Tilley, publisher. It's like a very pleasing kind of setup.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons I think they did it inexpensively, is that they were reformatting number one and they've been thinking about the format. So we're getting a little bit of the benefit of this.
It's just the first video.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, it does look good. And I've always wanted, I'd like the idea of recommendations rather than
Do's and don'ts.
do's and don'ts.
Right.
I think that, I think that we do have to give a clear message, at least from my seat to the ARB, that, again, it's a recommendation, and you try to hold them to that standard. And I think very often, I think you're right, it's gonna cost almost the same anyway, so why not do it the right way?
Right.
So I think that's always been important to me, that we have the guidelines. And these are presented to me as a user-friendly fashion, that it's not written, it's written for, guys like me, not guys like you, that you can understand it. And frankly, I look forward to reading it just to, learn a little bit about historical architecture. Exactly right. And all the correct terms for windows. But, to me,
We don't have a whole section on modillions.
Exactly.
The history of the Modillion.
That's in French. But to me, it's, I think without a lot of guidance from us, frankly, as a guy kind of working with you a lot, you kind of give us a very, a great document for not just the ARB, but for residents, that isn't kind of like this. Like it's go through like, the building code or something like that. This is not that. And I think that it can have a great impact without having do's and don'ts, because I think a lot of it is just, how many people just replace windows without thinking about it, because it's, some great contractor says, like, you can save a lot of money if you put in these new windows or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great kind of, speed bump in the process to say, hey, this is why it's important to consider this.
Right.
That's what I think.
Right. That's what we're hoping, that it's more of an informative document, and that, the baseline that we started with is like, to be something that's promotional, like let's promote the value that you all have in your house. Like let's start there.
Work,
Right.
that you have
Start there.
porches or whatever.
Yeah.
Emphasis on education.
One of the things Rick Pizzullo and I see in ARB, for example, are simple things like, it's simple things like when people are going to replace windows and maybe originally it was a 6/1 or it could be 2/1 and then they just like a different style window. These documents, or this document will go a long way to helping us convey to the homeowner that there's a reason that that style was originally in place and why we'd really like you to stick with the original. Because right now it's really just, it's still a matter of choice, but we think this is going to give the homeowners a little bit more.
It's a lot of meat on the bone, as opposed to saying, this board thinks it's historic and this is the way it should have been. It's like, here's a document that was researched, published nicely and even color coded.
Yes, and one of the benefits of the committee, I think, which has really made it, I think, the most user friendly, is we're comprised of, as you know, realtors, architects, folks with labor knowledge like yourself, which is me in large part, as well as others who just have restored their homes. So it's a real balance of trying to speak to each person, whether you're a professional or not. So I think the homeowners will really appreciate it. If I bought a house now, moved into Irvington, and was handed this as like a welcome, I would be grateful. It's a lot of terminology to get your head around.
It is, but it's also, it's presented in such a user-friendly way. Just even breaking it up into pictures, I mean, it seems like it was really well thought out.
The process, as Deb is kind of alluding to, these are many, many meetings where Deb and others brought examples from other places of documents like this, and what was good about them, what was not so good about them, what would be appropriate here, what would not be. So all this input, got them to a certain place, and then at the point where we said we really need somebody to finish off that work, and that was the need for having Steve Tilley actually spend his professional time as opposed to all this volunteer time.
And he's had a lot of experience doing it.
And he's known to us in terms of the library and the village hall and the Tiffany room, and I think
and when we made an agreement with him, it said no more than 40 pages. It's going to be more than 40 pages, but at least that was like a page. I was being relatively gracious about that.
The side that I think, even seeing this, I've seen, kind of a rougher version, and just seeing it here, when you're flipping those pages, it's so visually enticing. You saw that for the first time, and you go, wow, I want to read this. So if it's available, I think the plan is, it doesn't have to be printed a whole lot. It doesn't even have to be printed at all.
We're thinking it's PDF. Most of the time it's in PDF.
It's a PDF.
Access it on the website.
Which also has the value of, you get a little other piece of information, or somebody can't, you get all this feedback, nobody understood that part.
Right, and I think, in a PDF version, there can be hot links to the PDF, like for the references, you could click on it. I think, and we should assume going forward that people aren't going to be looking at these on paper anyway.
I'm curious that other people, if Janice, you had any input or more?
Terrific.
Yeah.
Just in terms of, I have a couple of questions, but in terms of that, I was going to ask about it, if it was hard copy, what was the size of it? But PDF is good. I just think you have to make sure you have a strong indexing function so you can
Right, like when they make the PDF, they need to really have the table of contents. That's not hard to do. So
I know,
it never happens.
So, conceivably, so it makes it a lot easier. Two areas that I had a question about. What would guidelines be for non-contributing buildings?
It's interesting, right? Because you don't want non-contributing buildings to be baked into being a contributing building. It's not like you're trying to make a building that was a 1960s ranch look like it was an 1880s Victorian. That's not the goal. I think for non-contributing buildings, it's going to be just don't do anything that. It's actually one of the things it's going to say is don't try to be something you're not. You don't need to be. You don't need to be.
Good advice.
And then also it's going to be direction about scale. Like for new buildings, like if you put a new building into a historic district, you want to make sure that the way you drop it in, like you think of, and there are some zoning issues that would stop this, but if you think of a district that has all the porches in line, or you have like a street where all the porches are 10 feet away from the street, and you drop your new building in, even if it's a modern building, it might be cool to have something that's like a porch in the same position. You might have a position on the lot be the same as opposed to push back.
This is funny because that's I made a note here about the problem with front yard setbacks in all the side stretches, that new buildings effectively have to conform to a front yard setback that doesn't match with any of the other buildings.
They have to be a 1950s car-based suburb, yeah.
Right.
So
So
that's-
how do we
that's-
address that so we can,
We had always talked as a committee that we were gonna come back with some proposed zoning changes that would better support the district.
right?
And we'll still
Because
work
that
on
would be,
that.
to me, that would be critical, because otherwise you'd have to make a note that, you're gonna need a variance to do what's right,
Well,
which is.
what we're hoping is that this guideline was sort of, this was the critical path, was to get this
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
And there isn't, honestly, there's not that much new construction. The district is built out, so the risk of that, so we're gonna try to get to that next, is really what. And when we last met with you, you said we were working on it. I'm thinking that was on my plate or something, I didn't do it.
Walking your dog.
It would be good, especially now that we have a historic district, to be able to have zoning that reflects maintaining the district rather than tearing it apart.
Right. Yeah.
That kind of, and some of the setbacks have to be looked at, because almost every house is non-conforming.
Right.
So maybe we do, now that we have this overlay, or maybe however it's worded, we can get some of that addressed.
I always thought it would be interesting to really just let the zoning stand without variances, because then what you have is these 5-foot wide houses.
exactly.
So like you have to learn how to staircase out. I think there's one in Japan that's been published, it's like, there's like
10 feet wide.
3 rooms and it's all staircase. Yeah, special district.
So I had one other question, and that is not to bring up contentious issues that tend to be issues that are contentious. The things on the roof, anywhere from condensers to solar panels. I mean, is there any nod to,
Oh, we did talk to Tilly about that. What did we tell him we want to do there? We didn't tell him yet. Okay.
We said this, it probably has to be addressed in some way, not in great detail.
No,
And that we would continue discussing.
I mean, one thing I would say is you could make the statement that, if stuff is hidden from view behind the parapet, that's fine, but anything that's especially exposed to the street is the big issue,
What
right?
do you mean stuff? You're talking about solar?
He's talking about solar.
Solar or condensers, rooftop,
Yeah.
Air conditioning and heat.
See, one of the things we've got to be careful with is that both solar panels and modern condensers, which are usually these heat pump units that people want to install in the commercial buildings, have such a green impact on an old building. Well, not the solar panels, maybe not as much, but like, you don't want to
You mean
stop.
benefit?
Yeah, benefit. You don't want to have, the businesses on Main Street not putting in heat pumps to replace whatever other stuff they have, because it's such an energy waster.
But you could set them back from off the
Yeah,
parapet.
and I think the ARB would already do that. We had a project that went in front of you for the one that has the gym in it, and,
The one at the corner of the bank, yeah.
Yeah, and they positioned them all out of view, and that's, the ARB would probably already do that with condensers. The solar panel thing has more to do with seeing them on the gable roofs on the small houses, and whether you want to do that. Part of me thinks, we haven't come to a position, part of me thinks that it's a reversible thing, the panels have a 15-year lifespan, but then you see them, but you're not necessarily.
20 years, right?
Yeah, but, that's the thing, like, you have to make some distinction about what the benefit is to the environment versus. And, the building integrated stuff is coming, and I think the ARB is right to continue, like, if they can, like, look, we need you to do building integrated stuff. I think which is like the actual shingle makes the energy instead of a panel sitting on top of the roof. Those things are probably still 5 or 10 years out. You hope by like the next cycle of.
Some coming out, they're not free.
They're not free and they're not that efficient yet. But-
So I guess back to, are there any, panel guidelines that need to be in place in terms of maintaining or protecting visibility from the street, I guess?
Well, I think at this level of this document, there'll probably be recommendations. The first would be, please look at building integrated ones. Please put them
I mean,
at the
it's
site
just at
if
that
possible.
level.
Like, it'll have that kind of recommendation at that level. And then,
You're not gonna be writing code, so,
Right.
but there must be a set of just, think about this,
yeah, think about putting them at a site. You could even say, make sure that you're making enough KW to make this worth it. Right, like for the solar stuff, because,
That sounds like an architect speaking.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. It would say in other.
On gable roofs, it'll be difficult to say that they have to be out of sight. You know,
Right.
but flat roofs and so on.
Well, certainly you could, but that's the thing about historic district recommendations. I mean, you could make a statement that, take a stand and say you don't want to have them on street-facing facades.
Right.
I mean, personally, that is one of the reasons, frankly, we've punted on this, because we have a differing view within our committee. I think that if you read what is in place right now in terms of recommendations for the village, the ARB is struggling with solar panels that are visible from the street and whether to approve them or not. So this document does have to address it, and we just haven't gotten to that section yet. But for somebody who's on the ARB, we most definitely need it addressed.
Well, I mean, perhaps the best way is just to say, resources, check out the latest ARB checklist requirements about solar panels, before you take any
Right.
action.
And one of
So
the things we
that's
have to
what
conform to
defers
is
it.
already recommendations that we have to make sure this doesn't
Yeah.
run 100 miles.
All right, good.
There was some discussion about landscaping. I recall from one of the meetings. Is that still in there, or is it an appendix?
It's not in front of you because we said, please go ahead and write it. Be prepared for us to take it out.
Oh, okay.
Right, so that's where we left it, because we weren't sure, depending on, that's why I think this, looking at a drop down, because I think the committee, if the landscaping thing seems onerous or inappropriate, it's probably not going to make the final
Can
document.
you talk about that a little bit?
I was.
Well, that's the question. I think in the committee, there's the question about whether you want to take it that far. And I think if the section came out and said, look, in the 1890s, the landscape would look like this, wouldn't this be cool? That might be fine. Like if it stays more on an informative thing, and I think that's where people were. Like if they see something where the do's and don'ts or the recommended and not recommended seems onerous, then it may not make it in the document. But if it has more of an informative and kind of like this is what's valuable, you may think that there was a fence in front of your house and I have little boxwood hedges. You may think that they would have done that in 1880, but they wouldn't have. And they would have done this other thing. I didn't know that, but it.
Actually, they would have done that.
Yeah, well, there's some
Exactly what they did at the
Well,
Historical
history
Society.
said-
right. Yeah, there's some other.
We did a good job on the landscape design.
But there wasn't, in the backyard was a mini farm, but there wasn't a Con Ed, so.
What are we
that's-
talking about?
The
No,
history
that's
said-
There's a lot of different styles
Oh,
of landscaping,
right,
and
right,
depends
right,
on your
right.
property, so.
Right, and what, yeah, so having the informational side of that, I think from, recommendation, there'll probably be a recommendation like, don't drop a chain link in front of the house, there'll be, that's kind of reasonable.
That's reasonable, yeah.
Yeah.
But-
But the samples we're looking at, there are two different approaches. We've seen obviously a lot of guidelines that are giving suggestions as to fences that are appropriate for that type of house as well as that time period. And then there's also some guidelines that have recommended plantings, and we just aren't sure how far we think we should go with landscaping. I think it's kind of a good idea to give the homeowner an idea of what are typical plants, height, size, width, even trees, if you're gonna plant. But that's another one where I feel like the group is a little divided and we're still talking about it.
Well, I mean, from a response from clients I've worked with, I think you'd get a lot of pushback on that. I think it would be interesting as an FYI, as here's some styles that you might think about, but what people actually, I've had more response to is actually providing them a list of the kinds of cultivars that were available in the period of time. Because it turns out that a lot of the plants people have now out of the trade, they're different cultivars, but the same species of plants were there. And it's surprising how many were actually available in the mid 19th century, 1850s or so, when there was really started to be a trade in it.
It's called the invasives came.
Yeah, right. A lot did come from that. Yeah, a lot did come like that. Yeah, but a lot of because there were growers in Lower Westchester and on the island that were all growing off of this area, and they had quite extensive. But you could buy an apple tree for 5 cents. So I mean, if your guys want that, I've got all that information that I put together for when I was doing research at the Botanical Gardens for that.
Well, that would
Historical
That'd be
Society.
great.
So that would be,
that's the kind of thing where you sort of
interesting.
I think so too. You're on Wall Street, right?
direct, right, well, yeah, so research just direct people to like, okay, in case you were wondering, this is what might have been happening.
There's a librarian, Sue Robinson, who's part of our committee. And there's a whole library of resources that John mentioned before on historic treatment of buildings as well as gardens. And she's checking to see, how many are already available at the library or any other sources like the Westchester, there's
The larger libraries.
larger libraries. And it's amazing how many actually are. Included in that is Restoring America's Gardens, the Encyclopedia of Heirloom Ornamental Plants, 1640 to 1940. And then American Gardens of the 19th Century, The Art of Beautifying Suburban Home Grounds, Victorian Guide. And that's not the end of it, that's just a few examples.
I brought up, I found a little bit that one of the committee meetings that I saw or listened in on fascinating, and I'm interested in Mark's contributions to this. And it sounds like it's something we might want to pursue, having, that right balance in there. But I'm thinking we wouldn't want to include
Well,
something.
I'm thinking there's one member. I'm thinking of-
Particular.
Who doesn't want to have
like
any?
the guy that, if we said that the landscape was going to be like more of a informational and that less about the descriptive approach, it sounds like everybody would be fine with that. So we'll kick them around.
Yeah,
It's not anything.
there were certain styles that were, they're geared toward village versus geared to the great estates, right? Because
I'm wondering if anybody who lived in the village houses had any time to do anything except take care of children and work.
Mick Becker, they had gardens in the back probably, because they had much more than, it wasn't as infilled as.
I'm sure they
There's
just
no
have
giant transformer substation.
Well, yeah. An acre around your house, even have, you grow quite a bit of vegetables.
I mean, obviously, people will make their own choices, personal choices about plantings and gardens. These will be, the references will be available to them to use, but to think that maybe you could enforce something like that is unrealistic.
I like the idea of providing it as a glossary, a reference guide. Here, read more if you're interested in this.
Right.
So then you steer clear of being proposing that.
There is, you can buy this prehistoric tree that they found, that they thought was extinct, that they found in Australia, like in this deep ravine. And it's a tree that's been around 3,000 years, and you can buy it for $100 online. And I always thought, I want one of those in my area. It grows 300 feet high. I said that would be a good thing, so we could promote something like that. So this is why you need a resource like this, so people like me don't play stuff like that. So, yes.
This seems like a good step, and
Yeah, really good. Love it.
the other train of work that's been going on at the committee, which I'll just mention because I think we'll be inviting you back. I don't know if we've settled on a date, but there is an effort to review a possible local landmark law that has to do with things outside of the historic district, but are very important buildings and places. So that's something the committee has been working on. Mary Ann, our village attorney, has had some input with you guys, and I think we may be asking you to come back at a soon work session. That was some discussion. So
I think that's a
just
good
in
point.
case you thought you had nothing else to do,
Right.
that's a parallel.
That was at the level of drafts.
Yeah, we got a draft.
Drafts, and did we review it with the whole committee? Was that also
I didn't,
that?
this draft is February, so I can't remember.
So you just let us know when you want.
Yeah.
When we want you back.
Okay.
But
I do think it would be good to have a few copies printed out and bound, have some for show purposes, but maybe at least one in the building department, so they could be referred to, but then they could say you can get it online.
Right, now we should have.
And each of the members of the ARB would have a copy, and we probably have a copy at the meeting available too, is what we were
Maybe one in
thinking.
the Tiffany room, whatever, so.
Oh, yeah.
Circle them around.
Yeah.
yeah.
But watch out, you don't take them.
Oh,
Good work, guys. It's nice to have something for all this work, right?
Yeah.
Good document,
That's great.
with pictures.
he's gonna have a second draft as soon as you guys do.
What is the timetable at this point?
Oh, well, they sent us information on that. May 13th, the second draft will be emailed. It will be, it still have preliminary content for purposes of review. That's reviewed by our committee and our feedback. And then May 18th, we'll have a meeting with the consultant. That's May 18th at 2:30. We usually meet at the library. And then May 27th, the draft to final document with more updated content and graphics will be produced. And I guess at that point, we will still be actively involved in making comments and tweaking it. And they have June with no date, no day for the submission and presentation to the village board.
Yeah, I think what they're thinking is they're gonna give us a completed draft, give the committee one round to modify it, complete that draft, and then we'd show it to you. And then they'd still have the ability to make more changes based on the DOT's comments. That's the thing we outlined.
Sound like a okay timeline for everybody?
Sounds great. Sounds pretty aggressive, actually.
You want to take these? This is the
Timeline.
schedule outline.
Okay. Well, thanks. Thanks to all the other committee members. It is a cool, great effort. It's so valuable.
It's very
Thank you.
interesting.
We're getting closer.
to work
So
on.
much.
Thank you.
It's been an education for all of us.
Me, I don't know those window names. Scrabble words, I'll tell you.
Thank you all.
You guys are.
That was interesting.
Your scientific.
Oh, that's, this is not, you have two.
Exactly. Let's just be exact.
Or you do it as the actual quantity.
This was 705, this was 74.
We need to adopt this now to organize time.
I try to jump back to that. You're good, sorry.
All right.
Sideways.
Oh, okay.
Interesting technique.
So, next item on the agenda is a discussion of a road dedication request from the residents of what I'm calling Padway Lane. I know residents there aren't interested in calling it that, but just for,
Ardsley Avenue West.
The legend of Ardsley Avenue.
just for expediency. we'll
The
call
cool
it.
part of Ardsley Avenue West.
So, you've received a copy of the letter requesting dedication. It also was in line with some backup fortifying their case, so to speak.
Should we invite them up to?
So anyway, their documentation that they provided shows essentially that there's been other instances where the planning board has decided through the planning process that a road should be dedicated, and that after the planning process is complete, the road is then offered for dedication to the village board, and the village board has accepted it. So that process happened, it appears from the documentation relating to Padway Lane. So it was considered, as part of the planning process, to be a dedicated roadway. And it was offered for dedication, but there was no acceptance by the village board. And there's no record that shows that after 1992 there was ever any offer for dedication. There was in 1992. The village board rejected it at that time, and then there was no offer of dedication after that.
Do we know why it was rejected?
Yeah, they had concerns about the future build-out of the subdivision, so they had responded.
Depending on how many separate lots, or how many buildings there were.
Well, there were arguments over that. I think that's what Barry Seaman had suggested, but the documentation that I had shown the trustees is that that it's in the minutes, and it's also in a letter to Dr. Padwy, that the Board of Trustees was concerned about the plans for the build-out of the subdivision, and therefore the future impact of construction vehicles on the roadway. So they were not interested in taking over the road
Well, it was being built.
while it was being built on. And there does not appear to be any further response from Dr. Padwy at the time, and then nor was there a follow-up request for dedication.
Is that in our little stapled part, is that, I know we saw it once
It's
before.
not, it wasn't in the stapled part. That's what the residents
Right,
provided to you,
so
right?
this is the one that you are referencing, that
Right,
copy.
right, just to fill in the history.
Right,
that's
right,
all.
I wanted to relook at that, but.
Larry, just looking at this for a minute, the pink is
Right,
private roads?
yeah. So that's my next,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, I'll get to that, I'll get to that in a second, so.
Can we pass that down here for a minute?
Yeah, let me just.
Well, the big one or the letter?
The big one, the private roads.
Sure.
So, I'll tell you right up front that the Public Works Department is not interested in having the village board accept dedication to new roadways, certainly roadways that are in existence, given their pretty sharp cutbacks in staffing size over the last 8 to 9 years that I know you're all well aware of. And so the concern that I've had all along, and I've expressed it in a few different venues, I don't know how clearly I've expressed it in any public meetings necessarily, but maybe through some emails, is that I was concerned when the board considered accepting the roadway for Hugh Hill, because I was concerned that there are or may be other private roadways that are out there, residents that are interested in having the village take over their roadway. And so I was very careful to present to the board a distinction between how Hugh Hill was offered and how it came to be ultimately accepted by the board. And keep in mind, the acceptance of a roadway is, as I think we've been advised by our village attorney, is completely discretionary. There's no fear that if you reject the acceptance of a roadway that you will be sued because you accepted someone across town or you didn't accept something across town. So it's discretionary. But at the same time, I think as responsible officials, you need to have some basis for making a decision anytime you make a decision. So I was careful to provide you with at least some distinction between the acceptance of Hugh Hill Lane and other possible roadways that are out there. And Padwy Lane is an example. So the distinction that I drew for the board is that Hugh Hill Lane was a situation which was documented that the developer, during the planning process, specifically came to the village board and asked the village board if they were inclined to accept the road. They didn't offer it because it wasn't built, the planning process wasn't even complete. And the village board at the time said, yes, we're inclined to. So as a result, they went forward with building the roadway out in to village spec, and expected fully that the roadway would be accepted by the village board based upon that promise. The planning process completed, and then the roadway was offered for dedication to the village board, and the village board chose not to accept it. And so the basis on which the board then decided to accept that roadway in just recently was the basis that the village board had made a promise and felt that that was a distinguishing factor that led them to accept it at most recently. That's not the case with Padwee Lane, and that's likely not the case with any other road on that map. So I understand that there's a contention that the planning board had it in their mind that this was going to be a dedicated roadway, but there was never any indication that the village board somehow made a promise that they would accept that road and then reneged on it down later on. So that's the distinction that I drew for you. You are free to acknowledge that and base your decision on that's in front of you now on that, or you're free to make a different decision. I presented with you, and I think it's attached also to the agenda, with the estimated costs associated with accepting this roadway. It's actually very similar to Hugh Hill Lane for what it's worth, I mean, in dimensions, with the difference, the only difference really being that the curbs are concrete as opposed to granite up at Hugh Hill Lane. So very similar numbers there. And then as far as other roadways that are around the village, that's why I circulated that map, and I have it here. That is, just to give you a sense of the number of private roads that exist throughout the village. And, you know, I think we haven't had any formal requests. I think I answered that. One of the questions of the board member was whether there had been other requests that have been denied like this. And I don't recall any other formal requests. There haven't been very many, frankly, but there haven't been any formal requests that I'm aware of that have been denied. But that's not to say there aren't informal requests that are made frequently, which I think Brian
I typically
acknowledged.
get every first major snowstorm, I get 2 or 3. How do we get our road taken over by the village? And I usually go over the process, but then I say that, you know, for the most part, the village is not willing to take on any more roadways. So, you know, I think that, I think it was one of the things we talked about with Hugh Hill, that once, you know, we were kind of, you know, by taking a road, which I don't think we remember even the last one was kind of taken over, you know, it's been a while anyway.
Well, I mean, the build out of Legend Hollow was probably the last time there was any.
Which I guess was negotiated up front.
Well, it was part of the planning process, and then it was offered to the village board, and the village board accepted it. It wasn't automatic, but it was accepted. And by the way, Legend Hollow, just so you know, and you can see on the map here that it's only 2 roadways in Legend Hollow that are public. All of the side streets, offshoot streets, are private.
That's what Hugh Hill Lane, to me, the board had said, the board of trustees said, we're take it. Then kind of the crisis hit, and they said, we can't take it. So to me, that's why that was really an outlier for me, versus, you know, pretty much any of the other requests I've got informally. That was actually, you know, I said you can petition the board if you want, but this is the first one that's actually ever come before the board. And to me, I think there is a bit of a Pandora's box if we just kind of say, well, you know, look at each one, because, I mean, to me, Padwee Lane is not that much different than probably 8 or 10 others on here, and I think that's the issue. And the fact that we've gone from 29 employees down to 20 now, I was going to say 19, but 20 employees. You know, it is different too. It's not like we have a lot of extra capacity in the DPW, which would be responsible for all this work. So, just even snow removal, and again, it's not just Padwee Lane. If this was the only private road, I'd probably be in favor of it. But because there's you know, so many others and some other large ones, I think it's hard to say no. Then it really just becomes a
How many of them actually have that planning? I mean, I went through all the minutes. I've got lots of roads that have been offered for dedication.
Yeah, I believe
I've got the sections.
I think it would be, I mean, if there's more information
I mean, it was the only
That
one.
is, if
You
I
know,
could just hang on a
I've got
second.
I've got one here that.
Hey. I was just gonna say that, as a work session, it's not usual, but after we discuss this, I would, if my colleagues are interested, if you have newer information that we don't have yet in front of us, I would be interested, but maybe you should, hang on for a minute.
Sorry.
I was just gonna, make a point on this, the letter that was to Howard Padley, August 17th, 1992, and this one is from the village administrator. The interesting point, and your point is well taken about, an absolute promise that we were sure happened with Hugh Hill. And here, when this letter says, we are not inclined to accept a road for dedication as a public road until the build-out of the development is complete, I took that word until to be fairly important in that this was a step along the way, that had to be finished, and then there was some serious implication that was a direction this board might have been going. That's certainly not a promise. I don't say it's a promise, but that made me think, it wasn't a total, well, this is never gonna be. And then there is the issue that I think we've discussed about, does the road actually meet the requirements of a village road? And I think we know that now, right? It's the right width, it's the right this, it has the right requirements. It's not like a path that has, some kind of pebbles. So
It seemed to me that the record was not clearly indicate that there was board acceptance of this. There was obviously some discussion, the planning board had weighed in, but unlike you wrote, where there was a clear record that the board itself had agreed to accept the road, that's just not the case here.
unless there's some information that we don't have.
But again, that's if,
Yeah.
you have the ability to either choose what history you want to look at and consider whether the way I presented the distinction, whether that's even valid to you or not. I mean, you know what I mean? There's no rule that says if there wasn't an offer and there wasn't a promise, then you can't accept it. There's no rule like that. It's
So your criteria is, just so I'm clear, that it has to come through the planning board process and then be acknowledged by the trustees as something they'd be interested in doing? I mean, in other words, isn't that how the Hugh Hill process?
well, for roads that are currently private.
I'm talking about for new roads, new developments.
Well, new roads always have to come through the.
I can hear you better from this.
That's all right. I'm
New
trying to
roads
find
always-
what the criteria is. What made Hugh Hill different?
That it was offered to the village board during the planning process, and the village board said it was inclined to accept it.
Right, which is, I think, what I just said.
That doesn't happen in every case.
Right, I know. I'm just trying to see what that,
That's the distinction about Hugh Hill Lane.
right. But from what, and I understand that all these other things, all the other pink monsters over there, looks like some candy you get from a movie theater, those little sour worms or whatever. So anyways, the thing is that the quote that Connie did read makes me, a little bit hesitant to say that there was an outright rejection by the village board at that time. It really does sound like.
I didn't say that.
I know that.
Yeah.
I didn't say you said that. I'm just saying that I sort of understand Connie's interpretation, because that would be the common sense interpretation of that phrase, which seems to not close the possibility, but leave the possibility intact as long as a certain set of activities have transpired, i.e. build-out has occurred. So it's not a promise, but it's not an outright rejection.
So the door wasn't closed, and there's no record that the promise was extended. That's what it seems like to me. There was discussion, the planning board weighed in, there was some communication back and forth, but there's nothing in the record that we have that shows that the village board ever moved ahead with this.
But there's no indication they rejected it either. That one piece of evidence appears that it wasn't rejected outright.
Yeah,
So you have-
to me, it was saying, when you're done, come back and talk to us again, which I guess is what we're doing now. It happens to be 25 years later.
I can probably speak to why that is.
Yeah, if we all think we're almost done, then we can.
Right,
Since there's not a huge crowd here tonight. might as well-
right, I'm happy to bring them up here so that I could hear what they're saying. If there are only 3 of them in their space, so.
Sure,
that's
you guys want to
fine.
come up?
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, for spending time. I know you guys are busy with
Many things.
reevaluations and assessments and everything going on.
Only on the periphery, though.
Remind me, I know Todd. And
So my name's Lydia Forsman. I moved into 62 Ardsley Avenue West in September 2014. So I'm the president.
And Ron Sherry.
Ron, right. Ron, Todd, and
Lydia.
Lydia.
I didn't realize there were so many private streets.
So without hopefully putting my foot in my mouth, I think that part of the reason that it took so long for this to come through is that the owner of my house, which is the house we purchased, was owned by the Rancics. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They're local builders, among other things. And they were the first house to go up. And there wasn't another house put on that street while they decided how many lots were going to be finalized for another, I think, 8 years or 9 years. And then 2 years after that. So the street wasn't fully built out for many years after the original proposal had been presented. And by the time that happened, I think the Brancics just, maintained the roads and did everything, and the people came in. No one ever thought twice about it. It wasn't until I came in and I moved in and I said, "Oh, it's a great street. Why aren't we on the map? I don't understand. And what's Padwee? Because I saw that on a survey that came with my house." And that's when I started finding out it had not been officially accepted by the town for dedication. And I was advised by someone that I could seek out a lawyer or something, and I didn't want to do that. And I spoke with neighbors, and I finally had neighbors. Also, when I bought, I had 2 renters. Believe it or not, I moved onto a rental street. So, it wasn't until last year where both of them actually closed on their homes. So we finally have the official residents of Ardsley Avenue West, the Legend of. All the houses, and there hasn't really been a period of time where that had been the case, because even when the Rancics, I think, kept my house, I believe that they built it on spec, didn't sell it, because they built it in '89 or '88 or whatever, right around that market crash, and they ended up living there for many years. So, this is really the first time in the history of that road that we've actually had the full residents here. So I apologize for the 25 years. I also did bring some pictures of the street, just in case you wanted to look. It's not a street that is in major disrepair. It's in very good condition. If you ask me, I think it's actually probably in good condition. 1, because we don't get a lot of traffic on it, but 2, we also don't salt our road. So I don't know if salt eats away the stuff, but the road is in very good condition. So we're not coming to you saying, please take our street, our road's in disrepair.
Oh, that's a good point.
No, so we get it that you're not coming here because the road is falling apart and you want us to repave it tomorrow.
Right, yeah. No, I didn't want you didn't see pictures, I didn't want you to think that.
But I think you're hearing from the different comments, but we have to be concerned about how open we are to accepting, all of these squiggly lines, some of which might need, significant. And I think the question is, what's the basis for saying yes?
So from my perspective, I've gone through almost all the archives of Irvington. I know a lot more about this town and the people in it, actually. And Larry as well, who's been around for a long time. There was a history here with this road. I do believe from everything that I've read that there was an intent for this to happen. It was the street, the curve, even the cul-de-sac in the middle was designed to fit into that area, and the street name took the same name as the road that it's on. I believe that there was a very good intent there for this to happen. There was no accepted offer at that point, but I think that everything was going along that way. And then, like I said, you had this lapse in time where there wasn't a full ownership of the street to present it to you guys. But the records document everywhere that Padwee Lane is listed, it's commaed by as is intended to be dedicated. And that leads me to believe that they're well, I don't want to say what I believe, but I think there's a history here, and Alfred Seaman, who I wasn't sure what he was going to say when he was there. I said, oh, as a neighbor, what maybe he's going to say, don't do it. But he seemed to kind of have a recollection as well that things got tabled as they thought about the number of lots that would go there. And I'd have to say that we have the minimum amount of lots because we only have 3 houses on that street. And it could accommodate at least a 4th. She has a double lot that's merged into one. I think it's not buildable even. And I don't know where that came about, but they went with 3 houses.
So you didn't have any further, when I brought this up here saying, we are not inclined to accept a road for dedication until the build out, and this was in '92. So you didn't have anything that Larry didn't find or, we couldn't pull up following that was a more substantive, yeah, we really want to do this. You didn't find anything like that.
No, and again, because the other homes did go up till 2000 and 98.
2000.
Oh, so both 2000, so it didn't go up for another 8 years.
Yeah, so 2000?
Yeah, there were no houses.
There
They
were
weren't
nothing
built.
there.
They weren't
So
built.
there's nothing.
I didn't realize
There was
that
one
the
house.
only got finally built out in
Yes,
2000.
yes.
So all of this correspondence from the 1990s
It was almost irrelevant because it's.
basically said we can't act on this until it's fully built out, but there's no record after it was fully built that there was any other action by the board.
I didn't find any.
And the planning board actions were all earlier, right?
Yeah, it was held up by a pretty extensive court case. That's why there was no build out for a period of time.
That's true.
And then the Rancics, like I said, they basically had the street themselves, and then 8 years later, when that time ago, no one was even thinking about the road dedication at that point anymore. The Rancics weren't supposed to be there.
Yeah. No, I get how that would have happened because so much time went by before it was finished. But it doesn't look like any action was taken upon completion to further this.
The subdivision, Mark asked what I thought the court case was about. I couldn't swear to it because I'm certainly not the village attorney and I wasn't even the village administrator at the time. But as I recall, this subdivision was caught up in a time when the village upzoned that area. So those are half-acre lots and the area, right? I think.
About an acre.
Well, you might have a double lot, right? But I believe they're individual half-acre lots. And the entire area in the late 80s, as a result of the land use committee and the comprehensive plan update, that whole area was upzoned to 1 acre. And the two fought it out over site capacity and number of lots, and it was not unlike
Caduzzi?
Caduzzi.
So in the end, they said that you could build on a half acre.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
So I guess it's the 4 houses that could have been built, although 2 lots have been merged, it sounds like, just because they probably were owned by the same owner for a period of time, so they automatically merge. So if you ever wanted to build a house, you'd have to subdivide again. I believe that's the case, but I'm not your lawyer. I believe if you're saying that they're merged, then that you have to re-subdivide basically.
I would just comment just on what Brian said about Pandora's box. I think it's a little bit different. I think because of the history that Ron found and because of the information that Connie said, I don't think it's like a comparison to every other division. I don't think, I think of things as I do every day. I'm a lawyer and I operate general counsel at a fund, and I think every day about contingencies and how things sort of spread out and what precedent means for one thing vis-a-vis another. I think we have to look at the history here, and there's clearly a history, and as Ron said, it's sort of then came along where we finally had sort of the full residents that actually would make, push it. I mean, my wife, Connie knows my wife and father-in-law. My father-in-law is a judge here. My wife grew up here, so, she has a huge history here. So it was really, when we all sort of came together to actually do it. So I don't really think it's sort of a Pandora's box, because I think, it has sort of a different history, and there's even sort of a record of this history, as Ron talked about, although, as Ron said, it took some period of time because it was only fully later that everyone came. I think even what Connie said, it's sort of until the build out, and I think sort of the build out didn't really come until so much later, and so really that's really why we're coming to you now as the members of the street. So I think there needs to be that distinction drawn there.
Because I think they took all the necessary procedures and steps up until the point where the land wasn't being developed and it lapsed until now. But they were following every protocol.
I
This is
think
where it came to an end.
when I was looking at it, I think, I wouldn't say it's all of those. I think I identified 8 that were very similar. That some of them are partial. Like, there's the public road down the middle, and then they were all built out exactly the same. And those are the ones that really make me nervous. Because I think there's 10 that are 12 that I counted. Actually, there's 8 kind of situations, but some of them have like spurs. That 3 were very similar. That for whatever reason, the distinction was drawn between kind of the main artery and then the offshoot roads. I'd almost want to go back and look at those documents and see if they actually had, where that distinction was actually drawn. Was it drawn specifically, or was it kind of drawn by discussion or practice? So I think that's my biggest concern. It's not all of them, because there's a lot of them are, I think you're right, they're completely different. I was wondering, like something like Osceola Lane, why it stopped in the middle, but I think it's just someone said, I don't want a big road through here or something, but the Legend Hollow, the Riverview Road.
It's like it becomes a dirt road.
Yeah. It's not finished, but
Yeah.
it's not finished, but.
Osceola, it becomes a dirt road.
It really looks
That's my
like.
street.
Yeah,
That's what I said, that's why I said. On the other side of.
Yeah, it continues, because I made the mistake of going that way once, and I went, wow.
I think you don't want anyone to cut
You
through
can't
there.
go that way.
You can't go that way, now I know.
You need a Jeep.
Yeah.
But,
The owners back there constantly, over the years, not recently, over the years, constantly, especially when someone new moves in, demanded that the road's plowed and why isn't it paved, and
You mean Osceola? You mean? Yeah,
I'm sure.
okay.
But, especially the Legend Hollow piece and the other side of Riverview Road, to me, are very similar. And there's one other area. But
The problem is, I hear what you're saying, Brian, but my problem is, the only piece of evidence that we have that conclusively addresses it to me, more directly addresses it, is the one letter from the village administrator that's quoted, that says, it doesn't say outright, it says, once it's built out and there's a series of circumstances, blah, 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 history, now we're here today. The fear that I have, which is based on what you're talking about, is, do we know that all these other, pink lines don't have similar histories in the planning board process? I mean, we, without doing some sort of exhaustive search, we wouldn't know that, right? So to the notion of how much risk is there to.
yeah,
Well,
I think that's what I was trying to say. Maybe
Yeah.
statistically.
there's no doubt that,
Statistically, we'll keep trying.
there's no doubt that some of the pink lines on this map will never be offered for dedication, because the owners of those private roads have no interest in having them be public. In fact, they vigorously every year defend their privateness by putting chains across the road for a day, and that preserves their being a private road. Others would jump at the chance, and I certainly haven't done an exhaustive research about all of these. These probably go back much further than the 1980s. That was easy to research, relatively easy. Some of these probably go back, Dow's Lane and El Retiro probably goes back to the late 1800s, frankly, when that was one estate.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
It's lane.
but that topic for that area comes up all the time. The entrance to the Dow's Lane School has always been a hot button issue, and who's going to pave it and who's going to put. You even have people now asking you to put sidewalks on the side of Dow's Lane, and it's a private portion of Dow's Lane, so the village can't do it.
Wasn't High School Hill a big issue too?
Over the years, yes.
Because I was on the
Yeah.
school board at the time, and I remember how annoyed we were that the village did not accept that road.
So can I bring up the issue of the DPW, our Department of Public Works, which does such a good job, as I'm sure you know, as you look around. And as Larry referred to, we have 9 fewer employees than we had when Brian and I think, started on the board. So we have done a Herculean job of getting the most out of those really able and efficient workers in that department. So, it doesn't seem like much if you're plowing one road. Maybe it takes 15 minutes to go around that street if there's a place to store the the snow and they don't have to like move it out. And then there's whatever time would happen if you have to repave this really nice road, but is it 10 years that it would be in a need for repayment, something, repaving, maybe 10 years, something like that?
Well,
Yeah, we just
that's
estimate,
our
yeah.
estimate at this
Yeah.
point. I mean, I think it's reasonable.
In general, that's what it takes, and that's,
It's not that high traffic.
yeah, but it's certainly not, yeah, right.
Yeah,
And-
but it's a roadway that's 20 years old, so,
Yeah, it's
so
already,
it's
and it's, so,
30 years for a side road like that is not unreasonable.
But
So-
I think it's fair to look at the history of some of these other side arteries, because we do have documentation that they were following the process and it was meant to be followed through. Unfortunately, 25 years passed, and we're probably a lot younger than we would be if we had started the process 25 years ago.
Which is the thing, 'cause I've gone through the archives and there weren't many that were
Exactly.
talked about overlapping planning board like that. You know, you can type in dedication on public roadways, Legend Hollow comes up, you know, the Sunnyside, which is the Hugh Hill, you got Field Point, which specifically states we'll do the main road but not the arteries. You know, those are all documented as such, and ours is the one kind of outlier that comes up as it was discussed and just
Never followed.
there was never a completeness to the topic.
well, I wouldn't want Larry to have to spend his time doing any more work on this. I mean, it's. And, you know, as we said at the beginning, it is discretionary, but we are mindful that it could be taken as, well, if you did it for them, you know, why don't you do it for, and it's, to me, it's, you know, I'm just feeling like, when we use the criteria of fairness, where do I come down on the criteria of fairness? I'm finding myself coming down on the side of this should be accepted, on that fairness side. But there are reasons why I'm concerned about the upkeep and the use of our DPW and whatever expense in 10 years it is. But citizens, residents have come to us with a reasonable request. You know, I want to be careful, not to just say no all the time, like no, but because it is taxpayer money, but you guys pay taxes. So I'm at the moment, I'm inclined to say there's enough reason with this letter and with the condition of the road and the somewhat anomaly and the kind of implied promise that I wouldn't feel bad saying no to somebody who had none of those things in their stock of evidence. That's just me. That's where I'm coming down.
I agree with that, but I also am concerned about all these other pink squiggles, because honestly, I would be surprised if part of the reason you came to us, I'm saying this the wrong way, I would assume that the fact that we did accept U Hill Road figured into your own thoughts about, well, you know, so they should accept us too.
Actually, it wasn't.
I had been working on this and had been told to get a lawyer before, and I happened to see the Hugh Hill, and I said, well, gee, that's coincidental. So it had nothing to do, nothing to do with it. I was looking through archives and I was like, look at that, it's right here. So, and that was after someone said, use a lawyer. I said, no, I'm gonna try to do this by coming in without a lawyer.
Okay. Accept. But with all our desire to be good neighbors and everything that Connie said, I am also concerned about a precedent and, you know, if it's sold within our discretion and we don't have a record and we have to assume that there's going to be other private roads in the same or similar situations, and then it becomes, well, you did it for them.
But I think you do have a record, right? Because I think you do have the record. I think that's the part where I disagree. I think you do have the record.
Where the road was built to those specifications.
Right.
I mean, it's not a slam dunk the way U Hill was, definitely.
Wait until she's done.
So that's the quandary, as I see it.
You know, I agree with what Hugh Hill is, that it was much nearer in time to us, so the evidentiary record was much cleaner. To us, this is almost like, you know, dust in the past, some of this stuff. You're going through old archives to find. So, I mean, if we had a criteria, I would be comfortable saying it's evidentiary based. Someone has to have something that appears to show a real strong case. I think that one document shows a strong case that could be clearly, anyone reading that would get the implication, or would feel like the implication was, come back when you're done.
You're talking about this letter?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, because of the language in it. However, so that would make me in favor of this particular application. However, I would say that all of those, anything else would have to suffer the same bar of evidentiary, so I believe a lot of those are gonna be just outright rejected. They weren't accepted at the time. They were already, like all the ones in Field Point, the ones in Legend Hollow were already cut off in the process, right? So I don't know that the risk is as great. I'm sure that there might be some other ones that somehow dangled out, but I bet you it's going to be very hard to find records of that. So I'm not as, I'd be worried if we were opening a floodgate to every one of those pink worms, But
Can you repeat that last thing you said?
I said I'd be worried if I thought we were opening a floodgate to all of the pink worms, but we're not. I think it's very narrowly you can decide it on the case of that particular letter that shows that there was.
So you're saying with the documentation and with the specificity of this case that you're not so concerned about future implications?
No. I think we have to, it's like you would do in any kind of case, you would come with a desire because the snow is out there. Well, that's nothing. But if they come with a document that appears to be communication between the village and the owner or previous owner, then that's something that has to be considered. My bet is there's not a lot of that hanging out there. But so I'd be more willing to take that risk and then.
Hey, I'm the one who has to walk my dog up here.
Feel free to walk
Yeah.
down the street.
Maybe cookies and lemonade.
Well, so I guess,
So I'm agreeing with you, is that?
all right, so Brian.
I agree. I'm afraid that, I haven't looked at the Legend Hollow document and find out why the side streets were adopted. I haven't looked at the other side of Riverview Road. And maybe there was, like, yes, the planning board's always said, yeah, we'll take the road, don't worry about it, just build a nice road, we just want you to build a nice road. I don't know that history. And I think that's the only thing I'm concerned about is that, there's certain squiggles that concern me, not all of them. And to me, before I'd have to be able to vote on something, I'd want to look, because I wouldn't have known that this property had this out there for all this time, next time.
We would know along this line, Brian, because I agree with what you're saying, I understand.
I guess
Would Ed have some
It'd
knowledge?
be all, yeah, you'd have to look back at the original subdivision.
Yes,
For each of those.
exactly, and the text associated with it. But could we hit the high ones, which would be Field Point and Legend Hollow, right? Those are the big ones?
Yeah, I don't think there's gonna be much in the record. Those are probably your low-risk ones, because I think the record is going to show that they specifically excluded the side roads, and it was done for the benefit of the subdivision being built out a certain way. They didn't want the roadways to be of a certain width,
They wanted smaller roads.
so they could have bigger lots,
Yeah.
things like that. So that's probably what you're gonna find on Downingwood. I don't know what you're gonna find on Riverview Road. Frankly, I don't even know what you're gonna find on El Retiro and Dow's Lane, which is a very interesting one. So there definitely are, and both sides of Riverview Road, by the way. So I think there are a few
But somebody would
areas
have,
that are more concerning, that's all.
but somebody would need to come forward with that information. What I'm trying to avoid is either your office or Ed's office having to spend a lot of time doing any of this, so.
I'm not interested in.
Right.
I'm not interested in making a case for something that I don't think should be done.
Yeah, right.
And I said that right up front.
Yeah, I know,
So,
I get it, and I'm,
you know,
so, my support of this is not to lead you down the path of having to look at others, or, having our board say to you, now go look at other things. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, in this case, if you're asking me, do I think we should go forward, I'm saying, yes, I think we should do it. It's enough of a case. I don't need any other analysis.
The quandary that I think you have tonight is that it sounds like it's setting up to be 2-2 if we were to do a straw poll.
Oh, I don't know.
Sounds-
I don't know where
sounds like
Janice
it.
is for sure.
I think, I mean, for me,
I didn't see it just vote for you, I'm just telling you
if
I'm
I
hearing
look at
something.
those, the other examples we cited, I might be able to say that this one is clearly different. Because again, first of all, the people in Downey are reading our minutes, so they're gonna look at this very closely, and if they can go back and say, hey, look, there's one planning board document that was discussed that said, if we build to a certain spec, then the village will consider taking over the road. Then we've taken on, kind of a lot of stuff. The other side of River Road, it's not that big a road, but it's really far away, so our guys have to plow it. That's, it's like plowing the nature center. It's just kind of it's gonna be 45 minutes or an hour, not 15 minutes. So to me, there's a couple of key things that I have to, before I can vote yes. Other ones, but it's going to be 4-1. My research is irrelevant. You're willing to take that risk, County, without looking at it. That's fine.
In the interest of saving, staff time, but also knowing that ultimately, as Mary Ann, our attorney, said, it's not a precedent.
But if Downey Wood came in and said, hey, you have a document that said, build it to spec and we'll.
Right.
We're referring to a letter from the village.
Yeah, they would need
It's a step
Yeah.
beyond just saying
Right.
Yeah.
conform
Yeah,
to
they
the
wouldn't,
thing.
it would definitely
I don't know
be
that
more
it's
than
not there.
just, I want it
Yeah,
and I like it.
I don't know that.
But I don't know that we should be, I just don't, I just feel like the only reason Hugh Hill is different is it's closer to us time-wise, that we're all familiar with whatever in the.
Well, I also think that the Board of Trustees said we will take it over, and then when they finally came in, they said, but not now, because it's not good financially.
Is that what they said? It's not good financially?
That was my understanding. It was because, we're in a crisis now, it's 2008.
I think it's the same with the bud here is, but it wasn't built out so much later, right? It's the same bud, it just happened to be one happened to be a 2008 financial crisis. Here's our bud is it wasn't built out so much
Yeah,
later.
but
I know it's global.
when I read that letter myself, it's almost like, come back and we'll consider it. We're not going to consider it now, we'll consider it. when you
But
get
nobody
home.
did.
Yeah, it just as, I don't know if that was it, that's just until it was built out and then it's complete, and now it's complete. Yeah.
So-
It's just we always do it, what's the exact word it says?
Until the build out of the development is complete.
What's written before that?
We were not interested in, we are not inclined to accept the road for dedication as a public road until the build out of the development is complete.
But see, I interpret that a little bit differently. It doesn't say, and we will be, to me, it doesn't say, and we will be so inclined once it's complete. It says to me that we can look at it once it's complete. That, we're not gonna weigh in on this at this point because it's not finished.
Yeah, I guess it's just I read it differently, but I guess it's
And then there was the thing about the trucks, when the trucks had to be off the road, and that was part
Well,
of.
that was the reason for.
Yeah, that was the reason, because there were too many trucks, and obviously, once you finish the construction, there wouldn't be a whole lot of trucks. Anyway, I guess, we could go around and around about this, but I don't know if,
Call Christina, see what she thinks.
well, where are you going at, Jen?
There's
That is where I
something that I'm sure we don't know the answer to, but I would wonder, are there other instances where there was planning board discussion of acceptances of roads that never got as far as the board?
I don't know.
You don't know, it would be almost impossible to capture that.
Not in my research.
yeah.
When you plug in every document with roadway, public roadway dedication comes up. It's ours, it's Sunnyside's, the same few over and over. And the planning board ones include the ones where it says, we will do the main road, but not the offshoots.
Yeah.
So you saw those.
I saw every document on there.
It's the search words that pull
Right,
it out.
pull it up.
Sounds like, they've done a lot of work.
I've spent hours going through decades.
And Barry has no recollection.
Oh, Barry Seaman. Well, you called him.
Alfred, yeah, no, his middle name is Barry.
Barry Seaman.
Middle name is Barry, that's.
Everything got tabled while they figured out the lots.
I'm sorry, he said what?
He was here, and he was part of the public
Right, he
comment.
was here that, but I don't remember if he said that he specifically remembered.
He said,
He remembered that everything got tabled because of the discussion on the lots. I don't know if he was part of the board or something, he said.
he wasn't, yes.
Yeah, so he said, I remember
Mid-90s,
everything got tabled.
So,
I don't think you're any further along. Sorry.
Well, you do have a problem now, because now we have to have Christina's input, and she hasn't heard any of this discussion, so we're back to having to have the discussion again.
Oh, I'm waiting for Janice to say where she stands.
This is definitely gonna sound like, but I really would appreciate an opportunity to think about this a little more, and to have an opportunity to, for each of us, to perhaps in writing articulate our positions, and not to drag this out any longer, because I honestly
And I'm
believe
not
if
in
you
that.
say yes, you can take a long time to say yes, so I don't want to do this, this just goes on and on and on and on. But this is new to me, and there was some new information tonight, and I think this was a fruitful discussion, but I would like to have Christina in on this, and perhaps we could all write up our thoughts on it.
It's possible for me to get a copy of that, that's new to me too.
I can email it to you.
Yeah, great.
Sure.
I should say, can I say, sorry, I didn't interrupt you. I was just saying, I was thinking also about the plowing. I know it's sort of colloquial. It's funny because when we were just renters, and there was a way worse summers when we first rented or whatever, because we weren't owners in the beginning, we didn't even talk about this public road discussion because we didn't feel it was appropriate because we weren't the real residents and the road really wasn't complete. And frankly, this summer, with this winter, which frankly way more milder again, and it was really when we actually bought the house, and that's actually when there came discussion about it. So it's not like about plowing some streets. This is not really what it's about. We feel that it's just appropriate, and this is what the record shows. I just don't want to think this is about saving $500 for plowing a street. Because that's not what it's about, guys. It's really about, because this is really what the history shows. This is really what it was always intended to be. And it's really because now because we like each other a lot. Also, we feel like the road is now complete, that really it is the full build out of the road, and it is really now the complete street, which it's never really been since Ron was there. I mean, it's never been that way. Ron was sort of the originator of the three of us, and it really, with Lydia finally coming in and buying the property, it was really, and us finally buying our property, it was only really then when it was complete. I just think more because I didn't want people to think this is about trying to save, a few dollars on plowing a road. It's not what it's about. I didn't interrupt you. Clear.
I don't mind, you guys wouldn't have to come back again, and I think even though Christina, if she wouldn't have to go over all this, if you or Brian, think about this and say, hey, then that's all right, if she wants, of course, but if to bring her up to speed on all this might be a little hard, so.
I'll watch it too.
She could watch it, yeah. So, but she could abstain, and we
But
could
then
still.
we wouldn't have an answer.
Right.
Well, except
Yeah.
if one of us changes her mind.
But abstention is a no vote in this case.
Okay, well,
So,
Yeah, but
well, see,
again, I'm not a definite no, I'm not a definite yes. I think I can do a little more research myself and check out the keywords.
yeah.
So. All right.
so you want to do an email follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, unless you're both, do you each know where you come down tonight?
I don't.
I would say Mark and I are definitely okay. We're ready to go forward with it. Brian
I'm
is
just trying to take these folks on their face value that the research into the keywords. Obviously, there's something that could be overlooked, but, it doesn't sound like it's like a real high-value scam here. And someone like Brian is now going to go through and look at, and do a spot check on keywords.
The planning board minutes and the board minutes both come up under the search.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. So,
right, that's why, all this,
The only one I actually saw, that is of recent was the Hugh Hill that came up under, I'm not even sure I saw it under the planning board ones, I saw it under the
It wasn't called that back then, that's why.
Sunnyside View.
Yeah, Sunnyside View, right. Or Furtado was the original owner, Furtado subdivision. So there's a bunch of different names.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate all the hard work and, we try to always be about fairness here, so.
Luckily, we're not expecting snow.
cloud and rain,
But you never know. This year is weird.
it is weird. So I say we communicate back with you after a little bit of
Yeah.
thinking.
We need to resolve this quickly, but I just think.
We have to have a public hearing.
And it's,
Oh, yeah, I mean,
it's
this is
obviously,
only,
I think all of us would like to respond to you.
we got to bring
It's a question of
Yeah.
what are the implications and our further responsibilities to the village.
Yeah, and then the process is there's actually a public hearing and everything, so it'll be noticed and all that kind of stuff, so. Sure. The earliest we can announce the public hearing would be Monday anyway, but if, so.
Wait, this long, right?
So 25 years. How old were you? No, are you all over 25? Just the rest. Okay. All right.
Thank you guys very much.
Yes.
Would you like pictures of this?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Larry, as a joke, Hugh Hill is not on there right now.
No, it's not.
I was looking, it looks like dedicated road, it's not there.
That's one of the,
Should put that one in blue.
That's one of the additions that we asked the our engineers to make.
Feel free to stay for the rest of the meeting.
So Connie, maybe do you want to try to bring Christina up to speed, or?
I'd say if she wants to watch this, if Janice wants to, do you want to communicate to Christina just a
Yeah, sure. What time does this segment begin, at 8 o'clock?
about?
No, Brian.
It was 7:35.
Wow,
No, we haven't been on it this long, have we?
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
We're supposed to be done at 8:05 on my time frame.
oh, oops,
It's actually
okay,
25 minutes.
all right,
Film permit will be lasted.
all right.
So she'll know where to tune into, that's what I'm trying to say. It'll be
Yeah.
7:35 to 8:30.
8:30, yeah. You probably don't have to watch the same things, I think we repeated ourselves.
Okay, so
Okay, so for the
Phil. Oh,
Just
sorry.
say yes, and let's catch it.
film permit, you know, it
good?
successfully took place yesterday. Apparently Ben Stiller and who else was in town?
Adam Sandler.
I don't know.
Adam
it's making
Sandler, yeah.
Facebook and the tweets, though.
Somebody that I know saw Ben Stiller,
Yep,
so,
yep.
but I didn't, I went down a minute later and nobody was
You
there.
missed the train.
So we,
I missed the train.
The police said they were both very nice.
didn't we
Adam
What
Sandler.
about,
agree to this over email?
who was the other one?
This is for the
Adam
minutes.
Oh, but what about,
After the fact.
Emma
So
Thompson?
we resolved to approve a filming permit for Gilded Halfwing Inc. for filming at various locations April 12th, 2016, 12 noon to 7 p.m. Permit fee $5,000.
So moved. Second, please.
second?
All in favor?
Right.
Okay.
Anybody
That
complain?
took in a lot less.
No, nobody complained.
No guns,
No guns, no explosions, no complaints.
The only one that complained was Metro North. And they contacted me to ask me why there were spaces in the south part of the parking lot coned off. And I said, well, the filming company should have coordinated that with you. And second of all, they're working on your platform, and there's Metro North employees on your platform with them.
We changed the name to Pittsfield.
Right, yeah, whatever. So he then responded to me and said, sorry, our filming department didn't get in touch with our parking department.
Oh, yay.
That's a big organization, right?
So
Excellent.
there you have
Two
it.
guys and, you know.
You two should
a desk
talk to
apart
each
from
other,
right?
No, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
He came on to me like it was a major
Yeah.
major problem. you know.
That yellow.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay,
Nice.
so I didn't bring printed copies of the, but I.
You gave it to us last
Oh, by
week.
the way,
Oh,
This
yeah.
is what the map is gonna look like with the co-branding.
Yes, this is beautiful. We should have shown that to John
I didn't
Malone.
want to interrupt them, but
Okay.
what is this?
This is just the Slow Down Irvington is supporting the printing of this.
And we moved the Walter Sedovic's logo to the center
Oh,
where we
good.
could expand it so it was legible, because it
Yes.
was not readable.
Good, it's better, much better,
So-
thank you.
Do you want to keep that, or can I show that to
You can keep it, yeah. It has the
It
The
is
things that are correct, everything is correct absolutely by the way it was submitted to the national, and then this is on here. So every time somebody looks at roads, they think, slow down. Okay.
Ah,
All right.
Okay. So open items, follow-ups, whatever.
yeah,
I
ready?
have to look
Okay,
at,
go ahead.
So,
I have to look at one of, can I come over to you and see that?
Yeah.
Was it-
My original copy of my work session stuff.
Sorry,
uh,
I'll
That's
do
my
it.
fault. You gave it to
No,
us.
no, it's all right. I gotta balance that all out.
yes, we do have there's a second document, right, the village tasks or something that is not the open
Projects.
Projects.
Full projects.
Yeah, so we'll review that, maybe next work session, or what?
Sure.
Fun. Well, I was going down, I'm just gonna go down 19.
Yeah.
It says, who? Oh, I said, oh,
Have to read your water meter.
yeah, there was gonna be a water meter. Did I promise to make one of those? with-
No, I think Christina offered and there was,
Jim.
they wanted to rope Jimmy, which we
Yeah.
and I just
If you want to put it down, I'll do it, or if she can't do it, I'll do it with him if he wants to do it. I'll do it.
cool.
I'll just use my iPhone and,
Oh, that would be cute, because Jim is great.
well, we want him to talk
Yeah,
clearly but succinctly.
with one of them right in the,
Right there.
right there, yes, you're good at
Okay,
this.
so-
Okay,
And then maybe just work with him and find out when he's gonna, let's do it when it's nicer out.
Sure.
27, it sounded like, as of what? You said Verizon was starting to address about a dozen.
Well, it was the last time I updated, so it's probably a couple of weeks ago. They were working on a series of them. They've all been notified, they've all acknowledged that they are planning on working on it, but none of them have been specific as to exactly when they're going to address it. I've not been able to get them to put an exclamation point on exactly that.
So there's comment that they will take care of them in the next few weeks. We don't really know that. They've promised to take care of them.
That was, the cable-related ones, I believe, have been largely taken care of. It's telephone and mostly telephone, frankly.
That would include one in front of my house, by the way.
Okay.
so is this just the poles,
Just an-
or is this also the double redundant, saggy?
I brought that up. There's no current effort to try to weed out any unused wires. We've asked them to do that, but frankly, I can't even get them to remove the poles. So I'm working on the poles, frankly.
There's also a
It's a
bunch
great
of
idea,
places where they're like really sagging
That's what I mean,
wires.
yeah.
You know, people have tied handkerchiefs around them, so you know, strangling or something on them, but
If you see where they are, let me know. I'm sorry, those
Should be taken
those
care
are
of.
safety issues,
Yeah.
if that's what you're talking about, yeah. Okay.
and when Con Ed put up a new pole, they specifically said they couldn't control the other pole had to stay there because the cables were on.
Until both the cable and the phone company has said they're clear of the pole, the comment can't take it down.
As we understand it, there's a central system that the Public Service Commission requires the utilities to be part of, and that is, it's a list of where there's double pole locations. The problem, and so any time a utility can go in and see where there's a double pole, that has to be addressed either by them, Con Ed or Verizon or whatever the pecking order is. The problem is that there's no regulation, from what we understand. There's no regulation imposed by the Public Service Commission as to when they actually have to clear up the problems. So they have a tracking system, but there's no enforcement
And I think I
system.
remember we talked to Tom
So-
about that.
Right, so this is, all this is continually, this item will be on here probably.
Forever.
So we're all resigned. Right.
Aye.
So, but listen, can I just suggest something, maybe?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean listen, but
Just say it.
is Avenatti, like on the committee that's oversight of the public
Yes,
PSC?
utilities, yes.
So maybe we should write a letter to him asking if,
You're ready to do that?
Yeah, I think you
I think I
Of
sent
the
the
entire
email.
board?
I don't think so. I think I sent an email.
can we send one from the board that just says, look, this is a,
Yes.
sorry, what you just said, that we know there's a centralized system, but there's
Which is a
no,
good start, but there's no teeth.
teeth and there's no way to get a dedicated due date on anything.
Yeah, why don't we start with that?
I,
Because we're powerless without that. That's the guy, he's their boss.
I know he's powerless too.
But, yeah, at least, but he has more power than we do.
Well, he's on the committee that supposedly is
Yeah.
the boss, right? We're not the boss of me, but the committee is. So anyways, well, the PSC is set up to be an independent, it's like you get assigned to it by the governor, but it's very hard to get anyone off of it. There's no, you're not voted off, you know what I mean?
You're on.
You're on until you die or you commit a crime.
Yeah.
I know that,
Happens a lot in New York.
am I right that Richard Brodsky, of course, is not in the legislature anymore, but wasn't he a major player in that committee? He's still around. He was at one of the Walmart dinners.
He may have been, but.
Maybe so.
He had the same role as Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that was the same position, okay.
So, 65 invasive information. I know my name is on there.
What's
Sorry.
invasive information?
The new regulations from the DEC
Plants,
that about,
invasive plants.
Oh. It says invasive information.
It could be
Well, the
aliens.
information does get under your
So
skin.
it's information on invasive species.
Right,
Oh.
it's not information that gets under your skin.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Anyways, I know I am supposed to do it, I just need, you know,
Change the language.
like about a week to get back into it, and I just haven't had the
Maybe
time.
over the summer, we'll slow it.
Yeah, maybe so, if I'm not off in Puerto Rico.
Getting slow here.
All right.
Yeah. Sustainability coordinator, I think that the date,
Yeah.
the last update, because obviously the contract was,
Oh, yeah, no, that's approved, you're right. That's,
maybe we're on to the next step, which
yes,
is
you are.
the consultant coming in to,
Yeah, I'm not, I'll tell you where I'm at on that. One of the main features of the environmental action plan, one of the main starting points is to come up with a target for efficiency, for, energy use and energy reduction. And I tried to work with a consultant who could come in to do that, and I wasn't successful. So I decided to go about it a little differently. I've only done some initial work on it myself, but I think it has some potential. I started to compare some of our facilities with industry benchmarks that are established by Energy Star. So there's a benchmarking tool that Energy Star offers that would allow you to enter your facility, the description of your facility, with number of employees, what the hours are, the dimensions, things like that, and compare that with industry standards for those types of facilities.
And the type of building?
Like an office building, yeah, exactly, by category. And for example, I put in some basic information about Village Hall, which is, it's a little hard to go by because you have a 24-hour operation and you have just a regular office operation as well. So, but our building actually, rates, and then I looked at it over time with the data that we have in Utility Track.
facilities do.
Facility dude. It's called Utility Track. I'm trying to be nice. And our building actually stacks up pretty well against other industry standards for office buildings. With that in mind, you would, for example, set a goal that you wouldn't look to reduce energy use by 30% for a facility that's already very efficient, but you as a 10% reduction, 15% reduction, something modest. So what I did that work on my own. What I was thinking is that we have the possibility of using an intern from the high school, and I thought that at least a meaty project for that person to do rather than sitting and scanning documents, which is mindless, is to work on that area that I'm talking about. And doesn't have full application to all of our facilities because some of our facilities are so specialized that there aren't
DPW.
similar. Yeah, well, so that's I think I've given up on the consultant approach, and I want to just see if this approach yields us at least enough information to be able to set an energy reduction goal going forward that's reasonable, and that's where I am.
Well, I mean, part of it, there's a lot of
I couldn't
different
put that
aspects.
right.
I mean, there's lighting, there's heating systems, there's air tightness of the building, I mean.
Well, but it considers that you enter, amount of fuel usage, amount of electric usage, and that's compared to an Energy Star rated facility of 75, for example, and it shows you where you fall. You might be at 50 or 60 or 75, whatever, but if you're already at 75, you're already very energy efficient. So that's kind of the example I was using. So
Village Hall is actually that energy
it was
efficient.
actually very good compared to, unless my input parameters are totally wrong, it was actually very good. So, but I'd like to see how it works for a facility like the library, for the senior center, and for the rec center. It's a little hard to go at the fire station. It's probably, I don't think there's benchmarks out there for that. So that's a little different.
See, there's other areas besides just, I mean, obviously, is that looking at electrical or just heating?
Yeah, it's electric usage and the heating fuel usage. And it just takes into account the hours of facilities, the number of employees, you know,
And
there's
so
such parameters.
What about,
I'm happy to show you if you want.
no, that's fine, I'm just, yeah.
It's-
I'm interested also, you know, in kind of like a water conservation aspect of things, you know, we talked
It's not
about.
hard. I mean, it doesn't mean it won't be, but it's not part of it.
So what would the intern do?
Gather the data for our facilities and enter it into this benchmarking tool. that's
So
available.
like how much electrical, how much, okay,
Yeah.
I got- that sounds like a, yeah,
It's an interesting project.
Physically start, yeah.
Yeah, it's got some potential.
okay.
So I don't know where this goes, and it may be on the other thing, on the other list, but I would definitely like to talk about, we developed that irrigation thing, card, information card, then we developed a water conservation brochure. I'd like to talk about, with you, Larry, about a water program, initiative in the village, where, you know, like, you always read where the village is, not the village, but it always works best when the government is kind of like, eats its own dog food or whatever, you know, that's the example, right? So the case of this would be like, this is a case where it may be some low-hanging fruit, such as rain garden at the nature center, you know, is an example that the municipalities, you know, doing something, looking at the water facilities and going into low-flow toilets, I mean, or whatever it is, so that you can actually say, well, we've done it.
We do it as a.
You know, maybe it's all of 6 bathrooms that have to have the toilets changed or something like that, but we make a project out of it, and then we can start to preach to people like, the village is doing it, you could save money too. So,
I don't think we enter, that's something that we would do as a benchmark to enter or as a base, the utility track, to make sure that that's tracked there, and then we can track our success or failure at.
so that's why I said, I don't know if this is an open item here, or if it becomes something that we
No,
can
that's
talk
fine.
about, a project kind of
That's
thing. And I know that there's some other stuff about stormwater and stream flow clearance and all that may be being talked about in Green Policy Task Force, which is a little bit different than the conservation side of stuff.
Right.
78 ARP checklist. I was just making a comment that it really sounds like Rick is taking that on to push it forward, at least his comments he made. And I think the thing that we should advise him, or maybe you could, is that he probably needs to prioritize, figure out how many which ones they need, and then figure out which order to do them in.
So you're in touch with him on, when you go to the meetings?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am. But,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, I think, way to go.
I think you just could have more support by having Larry say, you know, great, go with it. Right? I don't
Well, I'll say.
Oh, yeah. Rick, go with it. Okay, so the traffic calming capital project 87, that is the bump outs. That's what that is.
There's a bunch of stuff.
Well, I'm just wondering, I thought it was only
Yes, and the
North
cross,
Statue
and
Street
the
crosswalks.
it's one set of bump outs, and then the crosswalks on Broadway.
Is, and the projected time to start the actual, I know they're marked on Dutcher, is there any projected next step there?
Well, they have to do the final design.
The
And
field test is the paint.
that's it.
And Han is doing that?
That's in their court, yeah.
Okay.
Are we
I
doing,
don't know the timing right now, honestly. I can't, I haven't been able to nail that down because the crosswalks and the bump outs as one contract, and the crosswalks are in DOT's hands.
Oh,
in
so
terms of
to
review.
wait for that.
I could be missing now. I thought there were crosswalks associated with the bump outs, no? They're not gonna be any enhanced?
Yeah, there are too, but the enhanced crosswalks up on Broadway require DOT approval.
Yeah, no, I'm
So-
not assuming about those.
But the design of those is probably what we're carrying forward into the design down here. I mean, it would make sense to have a consistent
Yeah.
design.
Maybe.
You can review it when they come in.
No, they always say, I'm gonna say maybe, and I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm saying
But you can
that you
review it.
have a different speed zone in Broadway than you do on Main Street.
Don't ask me about design. I have no opinions about color and design and any of that. That's why I hire people. I don't. So you can look at it all you want and go back and forth with me through the designer. That's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't. it's an open book. I have no opinion. How's that?
93 solar panel review requirements, I think we're back to the same thing, that it's just,
We're gonna have a
There's a-
work session,
yeah.
right?
There's
With
a
Mary
five-
Ann. Yeah.
I think the one thing we probably should do, Larry, is just circulate the existing 5-page thing from Andy. I don't know if you've done it lately. Maybe you should send it to all of us.
To the board, oh, sure.
It's on, supposedly it's on the website, it's somewhere,
It's on the website, absolutely.
it's easily linkable. And I know that when Rick was before the ZBA, he mentioned that document and they had not heard of it. And that's what caused that delay in that decision, because they wanted to look at it and see what its content was and how easily accessible it was.
Okay.
Findable, discoverable.
Well, I mean, any applicant that comes into the building department has that checklist.
Yeah.
I know, but so the ZBA is,
Okay, whatever.
maybe, yeah, exactly. 94, I just don't even know how we're gonna get,
I don't know. I don't even know where to start.
that's the solar panel glare best practices.
Oh, right.
I think that should just be folded into that other document
Yeah,
in terms
I
of the
agree.
stuff. We can't ask Ed to go out, what time of day does he go out there? And when is it shining in my window versus Moses'
I mean,
window?
yeah, it's gotta be like about a 4-minute window, depending on the angle of the sun.
Like
you know?
when I was
Just
here,
just to say, the action item should change to say, fold them into the NRB checklist. That's good. Then we're done. And Ed isn't done at that point. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
Cook done, like.
He's not getting it, yes.
He's not getting the tail end of the dog. 99 planting agreement down by 76 Main Street. I just have to tell you, you probably want to talk to Michael Bradley, because there's no one on the tree commission that believes that planters should be used anywhere
Yeah, I know.
on Main Street.
Yeah.
So they all,
And they still want, the Bradford pears to be planted too, so.
yeah.
So now, do I throw away the streetscape plan? I mean, what do I do with that?
No, the straight plan didn't totally say, it said planters were an option, but no one necessarily.
Are you sure? Because I thought that if there were wires there,
Well, I don't know about that.
I thought that was the case.
I'll go back and look at it.
I think it's very questionable about whether or not those planters should be the only option. I thought that was an alternative, but not written as a.
I'll see what the language is, and if it doesn't mean that,
Should I put your email on it?
I got that assignment. I'm taking that assignment to look at what that section says and communicate it. And that doesn't mean that that's the absolute no.
No, but the issues were about the planters was no one could agree about the planters.
Yeah,
Because of
I
the
know.
size and the cost and whether or not they really made sense. And I don't know that it was ever at a point that, anyways,
Well,
I think it's.
I don't want to be in the position of saying, okay, we need to listen to the tree commission, and then we completely ignore the streetscape plan.
Right,
So
right.
I don't.
Well, the tree commission is coming in and saying they don't advise you using the planters.
Okay.
There's
Now what?
one person who supported the planters in the entire village. Okay?
Let me go read it again, okay?
We'll
It's
move
the-
on now.
Right.
I'm not adverse to modifying what the plan was. I mean, that's fine, but
I don't think it's a modification like that. I think we'll see. So,
I'm not doing anything with that at this point because.
well, let's review what's going on.
Because it was originally supposed to be a test of Ann Anderson's experiment using planters, so that probably shouldn't take place until the other issues resolved. That's my guess.
Right, and I think you have to get the, well, anyways.
Yeah.
And then 104, you already supplied us that data.
Which one was that?
Padway Lane, what is the cost?
So you can take it off.
It's done.
Nothing ever
Look at
comes
that.
off.
I don't know what the gray versus white was, but that's,
No, the gray ones are the ones that changed since the last time you saw this.
oh, I didn't know that, okay.
Yeah.
As far as then we were down to like the traffic and pedestrian safety issues, I have a spreadsheet that you probably know I'm working on, of recommendations, and I think that's just gonna take over this section.
Agreed. Yep.
And But the one that, 53, I wanted to just ask you if you had any updated information about the.
I have a report that's produced that I can send you. I'll send it to you this Friday in your folders.
Location.
It's sorted by location. It's not the way I'd like it, but it's probably the best that we can get out of the system that we have. So it's violations sorted by location.
But types of violation?
Yes,
I mean, it's just-
it'll list a description. It'll list a brief description of what the violation is.
Oh, it's not filterable like just a subset of violations? Or has it got violations?
Let me send it to you.
I'm just trying to think, because violations means more than just a traffic ticket, right? Or,
Well,
I don't know.
no, I think it's just VTL stuff. It's not. It's not.
It's not like marijuana or something.
I don't think so. I'll look at it again. I don't remember.
Otherwise, we're telling people where to go meet their dealer, what corner to meet them on.
Or what the best one is.
Yeah. So, and then we have to look at it, and I just want to pass on that the traffic committee would be really interested in seeing this information as well when it becomes available. Because they'd like to sort of help track if anything is making a difference.
Yeah.
That's it? Thank you.
Okay. Executive session.
I'll make a motion, adjourn to executive session regarding collective bargaining. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?